Hello, welcome. In the last two videos, we've looked more closely at both the importance of relational connection and emotions for us all. And today, I want to start our first look at verbal communication. This is a big subject, but given how important talk is to us all and how it can make or break relationships, it definitely warrants a much closer look. In doing so, I'd like to begin by looking at our understanding of what we say and mean and what can affect that. As we can all attest to, it's not always quite so easy as I speak, you understand me, or vice versa. We're all aware of this to varying degrees through our own experience of conversation in life with other people. This tells us that it doesn't always go smoothly. Sometimes at the most unexpected moments, we sail into stormy communication waters with others, including when we're expecting or meaning to have an enjoyable time and to feel in step with each other. So when this happens, it can feel both frustrating and at times even upsetting. And there are a number of possible causes and reasons for triggering these communication breakdowns that may be difficult for any of us to recognize at the time. Clearly, it can benefit us all to know more about what these are, why they happen, in order to be able to repair and resolve issues more quickly. So today, I want to look at one of the contributors to unintended miscommunication that perhaps not many of us have heard about. This is to do with what is referred to in pragmatics, which is a sub-branch of linguistics, as conversational style. This is a very large subject and will definitely only barely scratch the surface today. However, the intention is to make more visible what can innocently and unintentionally trip us all up on occasions. But before we look more into conversational style, let's just start with a few reflections about our basic need for understanding as human beings. Giving and receiving understanding is without doubt the foundation, the base camp of making sense of our world. We're not a telepathic species, so we need to speak words and use them as our main tool of describing how we experience the world inside and out. Therefore, the need to understand is a fundamental part of being alive and vital to us all being able to make sense of our immediate environment, what it means personally to us, and then as a result, how we decide to interact with it. In order to give and receive understanding, we largely, not exclusively, use words and explanation. In fact, we rely on them. This involves stating, informing, making points, expressing opinions, amongst other things. Words have specific meanings, and when those same meanings are commonly shared by others in a conversation together, we have what you could call a head start on achieving mutual understanding. However, it's not quite as straightforward as that because it's not just about the literal semantic meaning of words, but also about the context in which they relate. Context is extremely important, as it provides a significant amount of additional meaning and focus to the words that are being used. You might literally understand the words that someone says, but if you don't understand the context to which they're referring, then as the listener, you are going to struggle. And we all regularly experience this in conversations with each other sometimes, when someone describes something and we're having to wait and it takes a while to be clear about what it is they're exactly referring to. However, it can be even more problematic when we think we know the context and act on that basis, and it's actually different to the one the other person's operating from. One of the things that contributes to different assumed context between people is what I've just referred to as conversational style. And in a moment, I'm going to mention two examples of it and some of its characteristics. But before doing so, I want first to pay tribute to the work of Dr. Deborah Tannen, who is a professor of linguistics at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., for helping us all understand much more about conversation. how it affects us all, as well as highlighting where research reveals some overall gender preferences for certain characteristics of it. In particular, I want to mention two of her excellent books called That's Not What I Meant and You Just Don't Understand: Women and Men in Conversation. If you're interested by the subject of conversation, I can certainly highly recommend you reading these books, as Dr. Tannen presents her subject in considerable detail and, in my view, does so in a highly understandable and articulate way. She really nails her subject, and the books are easy to read and understand. Okay, so now let's turn our attention more specifically to shining a light on conversational style itself. Conversational style refers to ways of speaking and acting that follow from a largely unconscious inner set of styles and preferences. These determine both how we see the world and how we favor going about operating and interacting with it. Let me say that again. Conversational style refers to ways of speaking and acting that follow from a largely unconscious inner set of styles and preferences, and these determine both how we see the world and how we favor about operating and interacting with it. Things are likely to flow smoothly when someone shares that same style as ourselves, but it can become very frustrating, confusing, and difficult when we interact with someone who's speaking and acting from a different style in that moment. And this potential for frustration and confusion is made all the more likely because we tend to assume the style we adopt to be self-evident and the same both for ourselves and the other person. Therefore, we don't see the need to name it out loud. It's essentially implicit. Let's now familiarize ourselves with some of the terms that refer to conversational style and also expand on their relevance to gender. The first that I want to mention are the terms involvement and independence. You can perhaps get a sense straight away that they're somewhat opposite in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And this immediately gives us a clue as to what sometimes may be contributing to miscommunication and tension between people. Involvement typically refers to our need for relationship, community, closeness, and intimacy, and to feel that we're not alone in the world, while independence refers to our need for individuality, autonomy, freedom, and maintaining a certain distance so that others don't overly impose or engulf us. Both of them are vital to us all, and we're constantly juggling our needs for both on a regular and daily basis. However, research shows that in general terms, women perhaps tend to focus more on involvement and men more on independence. Now, this doesn't mean this applies to every man and woman, nor does it mean that women don't prioritize independence in certain situations or men prioritize involvement. However, sociolinguistics shows us that they may go about showing it or achieving it in slightly different ways. The main problem, though, is when in a situation or conversation, both are coming from these opposites without realizing it. When this happens, it can lead to perceived difference and negatively impacts relational connection. Getting to know about this and be able to become aware of it when it happens carries obvious benefits to the potential both to re-establish understanding and connection. Before we look more closely at an everyday example of these two in action, let's just spend a little bit more time in getting to know more of the characteristics that are associated with these very important human needs. Let's remind ourselves, prioritizing involvement is going to mean being focused on community and maintaining closeness in relationship as the principal goal. Deep down, this comes from the recognition that in certain ways we're all interacting and cooperating in a world where we're individuals and existentially alone. Therefore, to survive, the experience of relationship needs to keep isolation, separateness, and loneliness at bay. Community, relationship, and the image of the picket fence are deeply aligned, therefore, with the recognition and alignment with our need for involvement. With more of a focus on independence, it is associated with us being individuals as an important part of our identity, as well as those I've already mentioned of freedom, autonomy, and self-regulation. Hierarchy and status are also means by which independence is maintained, allowing those who attain it not to be bossed around and thereby preserving individuality. Men do this in relationships and groups, often by telling jokes and enjoying joshing and sparring in verbal ways with each other that may even include putting the other down in a light-hearted way very often. While these hierarchical associated qualities of independence have been particularly associated more with men, we're also reminded that hierarchy and status can be important to women too, but that women may go about achieving them in slightly different ways. For example, they may bid for them through relationship. In other words, for example, how many friends they have or who they know, particularly if that person is popular and therefore desirable to be associated with. While we all need a certain amount of independence, if we have too much of it, it threatens the balance of our relationship with others and the outside world. So let's just take a couple of small everyday social examples that reflect these two human qualities and values. A person prioritizing involvement might be more inclined in a group meal setting, say going out to a restaurant together as a group, to go along with a suggestion for everyone to eat from the set menu, even if they didn't like some of the items on it. They'd be more likely to do this in order to avoid a feeling or perception that if they selected their own separate individual dishes, they or the others might notice it and would feel a loss of connection that came through everyone having and sharing the same meal and food. The person who prioritized independence will be much more likely to select something individually for themselves if they didn't like some of the dishes that were part of the group meal. They would tend to come from the position that it was more important for them individually to enjoy the food than be potentially perceived to be, in some ways, potentially antisocial. Or in another social example, if a person prioritizing involvement went to some new friends and found that they really didn't like the principal ingredient of the main course, they might be less likely to say anything directly, more likely to pick at the food, or make up an excuse that they were not very hungry in order to avoid the host or themselves feeling bad. While in someone who prioritized independence, they would be more likely to risk saying something to the host. Being comfortable individually would outweigh the risk or discomfort in saying something, and they might feel anyway that if they were the host, they would be very okay with, and rather that the guest did say something. For they might see the purpose is for the guest to feel comfortable and enjoy the occasion, rather than the aim for the host to avoid feeling bad. These two examples reflect how involvement and independence might play out in these certain social situations, where it probably won't be likely to cause too much relationship tension, although it might be possible occasionally. However, in romantic relationships, it is much more easy for tension to arrive when these two values clash, particularly when one partner is expecting a demonstration of involvement from the other, but meets with the other acting in an individual, solo and independent way. For example, one person paying and ordering for an expensive item for themselves without telling the other person, when money is perhaps being perceived overall as slightly on the short side. Or the partner who bought the gift was at the same time or on the same sort of time frame, dragging their heels and being kind of ambivalent about deciding on a holiday that the other person wanted to get booked for them both. The other partner might be likely to perceive that they or the relationship were not as much a priority because they wouldn't do the same, or at least without first of all talking it through together. while the partner who ordered the item, if they didn't do it, certainly might feel restricted in not being able to go ahead and choose something autonomously and having to account for it, even if perhaps the money came out from their own individual account, if that's how they have their financial situation kind of sorted out. So while these two conversational terms can at times easily create minor or major tension when they clash in relationships, so can our next and final pair. They're called the message and the meta-message. They sound somewhat similar, but are different in key ways. The term message refers to the information that words convey literally and directly, whilst meta-message refers to the subject or context to which the words are applying and provides an interpretation and framework for it. It tells us about the occasion, our relationships, and attitudes to each other. For example, if someone's voice is raised and their face is red, and you ask, "Are you all right?" and they say, "Yes, fine," we're more likely to listen and believe the meta message that they're not fine rather than what they actually said. Someone who's strongly tuned into meta message will often be listening to the information in social situations, somewhat you could say through the lens of what does this say about relationship, and in particular my relationship to and with you. Whereas if someone is strongly tuned into message, they're going to be more likely to listen and pay attention more to the semantic information related to the occasion, when it was, where it occurred, and what happened. In other words, more literally to the information contained and to the practical aspect in which the circumstance took place. In these two contrasting and differing approaches to what is being said, do we find ourselves meeting the classic situation that often occurs between men and women the world over who are in a relationship. The woman talks about something for which she wants acknowledgement and empathy from the man, but may get a fix and a solution. So let's take an everyday example of this in action. A woman comes home at the end of the day and says to her male partner, "You would not believe how selfish some people are. I got to the checkout of my trolley and was about to start putting the things on the conveyor belt and remembered I'd forgotten an item. When I got back, someone had jumped in front of me and they had a huge trolley full of things and, well, it just took ages before it was my turn. So selfish and inconsiderate." "Oh, well, how long were you gone?" There's a small pause where she wonders inside why he said that. First early sign of danger. "No more than 30 seconds. I mean, I just can't believe the way some people behave." "Well, do you think you should have made it more clear?" She's now starting to feel both confused and accused. "What do you mean I should have made it more clear? It was obvious, wasn't it?" Inside, her partner is going, "What do you want from me here? I mean, you're the one who's setting the scene and you're obviously angry with that person. Give me all the details. I can see you're upset. I'm just trying to do what you seem to want me to do, which is to solve the problem of what happened. Otherwise, why are you giving me all the information about it? Give me a break here." So as he starts feeling more confused about what she wants and more frustrated himself and feels less and less that he's getting it right and knows what else to do, he might get more direct and blunt. "Well, obviously you should have put the divider on the belt and started unstacking things as a marker of what you were doing, and then they wouldn't have done it." An argument then ensues. What just happened here and how did it happen? This type of conversation and what then typically follows is something that many of us may have experienced in some form or other and at some time or point in our life. Let's look a bit more deeply into the triggers and contributors that capture this couple and spin them into tension, conflict, and an argument. When we understand the style of meta-message, the woman is using the situation, the story, with the information and facts as a medium for what she feels is a clear implicit message. And that message is most importantly about her experience emotionally and relationally. She's bidding for a caring, acknowledging, validating, and empathic response from her partner, which to her is obvious, implicit, and that she would probably expect to often get, and does get, from many other women if she had this experience and told them about it. Overall, however, the style can indeed be said to be indirect, and she doesn't tell her partner that she wants empathy. And we'll look at a couple of the benefits of not having to state directly what we want in a moment. Her partner's wiring and brain, however, is more literal and direct, and steers more towards focusing on the information and the practical situation, giving solutions when problems come up, and fixing them, because that's the method that he would most typically use for himself when he's in discomfort or pain, or he would get from many other men. Also, men have been socialized over millennia to avoid admitting their own emotional vulnerability, and to be seen if they did, this would be a weakness. And so they've learned to screen out and shut down their own emotional discomfort in favor of a more rational and solution-focused response. And he might well think, after finding out his response was not appreciated, or that she isn't wanting overall a sense of, or she is rather wanting overall a sense of empathy. Why didn't you just say what you mean and want? I mean, if you want empathy, tell me. Don't hide it. That's confusing for me. He's aware in a general sense that his partner is feeling uncomfortable because her words demonstrate it, and she's sort of generally protesting. However, if underneath her annoyance she is feeling vulnerable, hurt, or not cared about because of the other person's inconsiderateness, and she wants empathy, he has no direct evidence of that, and accepts at face value that the point is her annoyance and the story of how it all transpired, because that is what she's choosing to focus on. So being more literal and direct, he focuses on the information, and that is what he engages with. Let's see what it would sound like if she wanted and got the full-on response she might ideally be expecting, hoping to get from him. It might look something like this. Darling, that must have felt really frustrating, annoying, and inconsiderate. I can really see how unappreciated you felt by that person. That was the last thing you needed at the end of a long, tiring day. Why don't you just sit down and let me put the shopping away? At which point she might say, thanks, or let's do it together. If that sounds too full-on and unbelievable for your taste or your particular partner to say, then a milder version in which the same sentiments come across perhaps would suffice. And if he did that authentically, in a way that she connected with, she would feel probably emotionally and relationally deeply heard and soothed. And if we get sufficient recognition for our emotional and relational feelings first, this is important, we're then much more likely and ready and available to let in and use more practical and rational suggestions or information that might help avoid a practical future reoccurrence. But without it, forget it. No chance. I said a moment ago that her style was indirect, and there's a definite relational benefit to being indirect. When our intention is for someone to get our situation and give us appreciation, empathy, and care without directly saying what we want, there is a payoff in attachment and connection terms. If someone gets and gives it to us when we need emotional or relational comfort or reassurance without us asking, we get a deeper sense of not being alone. This is fine, of course, as long as the other person approaches the situation in the same way as ourselves. However, as we just saw, unfortunately, it can be a recipe for disaster when they don't. It's also worth saying that there is another emotional, relational reason, in addition to the actual sort of linguistic preference here, for not being direct when we're wanting empathy. And that's also a very compelling one, and very, very common for most of us. Namely, that it may feel emotionally and relationally too risky for the speaker to directly show emotional need and vulnerability in case the other person doesn't respond softly and caringly. And we'll look at this particular feature of human relationship in more depth in future videos, because it's a very important one for us understanding much more about relationships. Okay, we're getting near the end. Just stay with me a little bit longer. Let's now summarize the key points of this first look at a key proponent of verbal communication, namely understanding. 1. Understanding hangs upon both the literal, semantic meaning of words as well as the context. Context is contributed to by a number of things, including something we've looked at today that's part of linguistics, namely conversational style. 3. Differing conversational styles in a given conversation can unintentionally be both the source of misunderstanding as well as tension, conflict, and arguments. 4. Knowing about conversational style and other parts of linguistics can help us both understand the complexity of human conversation as well as reduce and alleviate the impact on human relationships when unintended verbal miscommunication happens. 5. Understanding how conversational style can differ between the genders can contribute to more quickly noticing when it happens and be able to repair the consequences to our relationships, thereby most importantly reducing the fallout from verbal miscommunication as a key factor that directly contributes to relationship and family breakdown, damage to children and society as a consequence. And 6, how do we do it? Well, as you may have heard me say before in previous videos, I believe we need to teach it in mainstream education. Thank you for listening to our first foray into the important subject of verbal communication. There'll be many more excursions and opportunities to see its effect on our lives individually and globally as a species. While this channel is educational in much of its content, it also has an inspiration on what you could call perhaps a philosophical side to it. So next time I'm going to look at what's happening to free speech and recent social trends that have started to affect it. Don't miss that, as I think it's important that we look in more depth as to what is happening there. Please hit the like and also the subscribe button. This will tell you when new videos come out, and do share these videos with others who might appreciate them and help spread the word. Thank you and bye for now.